Awesome to welcome UAB head coach Andy Kennedy to the Basketball Podcast. Kennedy began his coaching career as an assistant for South Alabama during the 1994 season. Since then, he has also served as an assistant coach at UAB Cincinnati. He was named interim head coach for Cincinnati during the 2005 season after Bob Huggins resigned. He served as head men's basketball coach at Ole Miss from 2006 to 2018, where he was a two-time SEC Coach of the Year and winningest coach in Ole Miss history. After working with ESPN for 2 years, Kennedy was hired at UAB in March 2020. In his first year with UAB, Kennedy led the Blazers to a program record of most wins by first-year head coach in NCAA and most wins for UAB since 2016. In his third season at UAB, Kennedy led the Blazers to a program record of most wins, making their third straight season of 20-plus wins.
Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you, Chris.
I mean, you've been at a few different places. You had success everywhere you've gone, and now you got it rolling at UAB. Must be a lot of fun to be there right now.
Well, this is where I was a transfer myself way back in the days where you had to sit out. Can you remember that? So I played for the founding father of UAB athletics, and Gene Bartow. We play in Bartow Arena, named after him, certainly appropriately so. So I've been a part of this program when it was really, national. So I know what it's like to be a part of that in a city that is known for being crazy about college football, and that's certainly justified. But there's a underground basketball here as well. If we give them a product by which that earn their support and can be proud, we feel like we've made strides. And that's here, and really look forward to bringing that momentum into our first year in the American Athletic Conference this season.
Beyond it just being fun back at your alma mater, are there any unique challenges that maybe we wouldn't be aware of?
Well, it's always challenging of college basketball in general with it's whether it be the transfer portal, be NIL, or whether it be us changing leagues. It's so fluid as it relates to roster continuity. For instance, this year we're coming off a pretty span, 56 wins over the last 2 years, 78 over the last three, which is the fifth most in college basketball over that 3-year period. But a lot of those guys are gone. We only returned 4 guys that played on last year's 29-win team, and we brought in 9 new guys. And it was an eclectic group from junior college to the portal to high school. So with that, when you bring in 9 of your 13 scholarship players that are new to your program, there's certainly going to be a transition period, and we're experiencing that now.
I'm curious your perspective on this. I've talked to some other coaches about this, transient nature of the game, and they've kind of argued that it's actually made them better coaches. Not that they weren't good coaches before, but they've had to really dive in and kind of figure some things out that maybe in the other, if they just plug and play into a system, doesn't happen as much. Is that true for you too?
Well, I think you certainly have to evolve. We can all sit around and wring our hands and say, oh, the sky's falling, or you can choose to evolve and deal with the hand that you're dealt. And that's been the way that we've approached this thing. For us, when you try to simplify things. So I think it makes you really, really dive deep, as you said, and figure out what are going to be our core elements and try to build from that. A lot of times us as coaches, we overcome. And in basketball, much different than, for instance, as the head coach, you got to be the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator. You're in charge of game management, your player personnel, and you're doing all that within an 8-second span. So you've got to try to make sure that your guys are not confused. We're 2 weeks away from the start of college basketball. And again, many new guys, when I look at our group and watch the tape, it seems we're a little confused at times. And that's something we've really got to clean up before we get into live action.
Of course you do, and you will. And that's one of the challenges too, is that you have more practice time than we had in years past. And then, of course, you ran a scrimmage recently, like a lot of teams. Talk to us a little bit about that process of having these extra practices throughout the summer, and then obviously building into the scrimmages, which, again, most coaches say are wonderful experiences to be able to kind of figure out where you're at.
Yeah, no question. When October 15th rolled around about a week ago, I talked to our team about in the old days when I played. This is the first time I would see our head coach, whether it be Jim Valvani or Gene Bartow at UAB. from when the season ended, and we played late into the season last year. We were in the championship game, so we played late into March. But once that game ended and we got back to Birmingham, I wouldn't see Coach Bartow, but maybe a handful of times until October 15th. And then you would go, 6 days on, 1 day off, many times 2 a day. He was about to break down after a couple of weeks. And you did that for about a month, and then you started the games. Well, this is so different, as you said. Chris, we started out in early June with this group. You get 8 weeks in June, then you get about 5 weeks before official practice starts. We're about 20 workouts into our 30 allowed prior to the opening game. So we needed desperately to play someone else, as you said. These secret scrimmages aren't quite as they used to be. They used to, slap you on the wrist if you talked about them, and now you kind of see it everywhere. I don't know what you can and can't say. Of course, the way that the NCAA is evolving, I'm not even sure what's a rule anymore. But those things are very, very valuable, because for the first time you're playing someone other than yourself, someone that doesn't know the plays and are trying to cheat the plays because both teams are running the same stuff. And so it was very educational. Everybody takes a different approach to that. I'm of the belief that, number one, you want to walk out of it unscathed. Number two, you want to get a lot of tape on all your guys so that you can learn from it, so that hopefully you can grow from the experience. And I certainly think we did that.
Great in terms of that process. And I'm also curious, do you do a debrief with your secret opponent after the game to be able to get a feel for what they thought?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times we will share scouting report, but because it's so transient, that we have guys that hadn't even been Division One. We played a secret scrimmage against a coach that is in first year in a new job. They had a lot of new guys, so as we will share scouting reports, but we didn't do that. But we do talk about, hey, this is what gave us problems. This is where I believe that you can be good, and vice versa. So very productive all the way around, and hopefully it'll allow us to continue to grow as we try to mature in for November 6th.
That's fascinating to hear how you and others handle it. And talking more specifically about your program, you shared your program mantra with me, which I love. And maybe let's start with which is be relentless.
Yeah, we want our guys to be relentless in the pursuit of excellence, both on and off. When you notice, when you say the word relentless, that's not a word that you probably use every day in your vocabulary. It's a pretty stern, it's pretty hard. It's like, hey man, relentless is relentless. It's not giving up. It's not dying, continuing to persevere forward. And we try to create that mindset because it is such a battle. When we start this thing, as you said, a long time ago, but in earnest at the end of September, it's a long journey to try to ultimately get to where you want to be in March. I try to tell our guys, and again, I'm not big to speak, but I do focus on the things that I can control and trying to stay in the moment. You can't get too high, you can't get too low. You've got to continue to work on being ultimately a better version of self, and just continue to stack good days. If you stack good days, at the end, when you go to stand on your work, you'll like your view. And been fortunate again in our 3 years. Our view after year one was 22 wins, decent view, but again, we couldn't quite see where we wanted to see. In year two, we captured a county championship and advanced back to the NCAA tournament, which is everyone's goal, with 27 wins, which was a program most. And then last year, we came up short of capturing back-to-back Conference USA championships. There was a team down in Boca Raton. I don't know if you've heard of them, FAU. The remarkable, great year for them, and Steve and his staff did a tremendous job. So we came up a little short in the championship game, but we were able to bounce back and win 4 games in the postseason for only the second time in the history of our program, and advance to the NIT championship game and win 29 games. So every year, man, we're just trying to stack work, and at the end, hope we like our view.
I like that phrasing, stack work, and I also like the phrasing, be the best version of yourself. And we'll get back to the mantras, but maybe talk about that as a goal, becoming the best version of yourself and best version for an individual player.
That is the goal, and I think comparisons are foolish. We all do it because we feel like we have to do it, or we feel like it's just I guess it's just a routine way of viewing things, most especially in sports. You're always trying to compare, but I think it's the biggest boy. I think you've got to run your own race, and you've just got to stay in trying to focus on being best version of self. I try to explain to our team, again, 13 players, 9 of them new. We're learning about each other, and I don't need any of them to be other than what we brought them there to be. We just need them to be the best version of that, so that individually they can reach their potential, and then we can put the group together collectively. It is a puzzle, and everybody there has a different set of skills. And again, that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Have those kids leave with a great college experience, having won many games with a degree in hand, walking out ready for the real world as best version of himself.
It's tricky when you talk about it that way, that it also frees up players to be their individual self rather than conform to, like, you're going to fit them into this square peg, round hole type of thing, right? You're going to let them be themselves within what you need for the system.
Absolutely, and ultimately, I think that's what coaching is about. We all recruit to a philosophy, and we all have things that we certainly believe in, and there's a standard, and you're not going to deviate off that standard. But I think schematically, we change every year. The last couple of years, we had a dynamic guard in Jordan Jelly Walker, who scored over 20 points per game in both years. Was a volume scorer, shot a bunch of threes. And we played one of the fastest tempos in all of college basketball. I'm not sure this team is built that way. It certainly, we don't have a Jelly Walker, so we'll have to score a variety of ways, and we'll have to schematically change the way in which we attack things on both ends of the floor. But I think ultimately that's the role of a coach. You recruit to a philosophy, and then you look at the strengths of your current roster and try to evolve a game plan that puts them in the best position possible to be successful.
Yeah, it's interesting, like beyond obviously personnel, which dictates a lot of style of play. When are these moments where you make these decisions about stylistically how you can play with this group, and as you said, be adaptable, not just play the way you played last year?
Well, it's one of the things that I'm kind of enviable of those old coaches, or maybe in awe would be a better word, of a Jim Bartow, a Jim Valvano, a Bob Huggins, a guy that I worked for, who's a mentor in the business. Three guys that I've all had an opportunity to play for or work with, that were all stylistically so different off the court, but all had one thing in common. And not only they won a bunch of games, but they built programs. So for me, those guys, if they started practice on October 15th, by October 23rd, they've got to figure things out pretty quickly. We had 8 weeks in the summer, and we have a standard, and we play a certain way just to kind of see how different guys can thrive in different roles. And again, stylistically, what is the best way for us to attack the season? So once we get through the summer and we break down, obviously we've put in some standard stuff, and then we start evolving off that schematically, again, on both sides of the ball as we enter into the fall.
That's great stuff. And talked about the program mantra. We talked about number one, be relentless. How about number two, be consistent?
Yeah, key to life is execution, is it not? I'm a big Shark Tank fan. You watch Shark Tank?
Absolutely, that's for sure.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, I love it in the fact that everybody's got a great idea. There's a lot of great ideas out there, but then who can those that execute are the ones that get the deal. And I don't think sports is any different. We want to be consistent and day in and day out. Our work ethic, again, stacking work day in and day out, not looking for shortcuts, understanding that there's a standard which you have to perform in order to be successful. Nick Saban, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a pretty good football coach just up the road from me. And he's always talked about, I show it to our team here, about this. Everybody thinks they have all of these choices. And the reality is you really don't have that, if indeed you want to be successful. He calls it the illusion of choice. Everybody thinks this way. You really can't, not if you want to be successful. There's a price that has to be paid. So for us, we want to be consistent day in and day out of putting in the work. Because again, when you're in a crisis situation, which is going to happen about 17 or 18 times in a college basketball game, you're not going to rise to the level. You're going to sink to the level. You're not going to rise to the level of the moment of the excitement. You're going to sink to the level of your habits. So we try to instill good habits, be consistent day in and day out in our approach.
Well, I love that. And, the third part that, brings it all together is obviously gratitude and be grateful. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, we want to ultimately be relentless in our pursuit of excellence, on and on, consistent in our approach, day in and day out, grinding, persevering. And then three, ultimately, we want to be grateful for the opportunity. We have so many things that we're blessed to have, and I want our student athletes to understand that although this is not easy, and no one has told you it's going to be easy, it's an incredible opportunity that you have to take a step forward, both personally, professionally, and to put yourself in a completely different position than where you were before. And we should be grateful for that opportunity. So in everything that we've been given and been blessed with, I want our guys to be grateful.
It's awesome stuff. And, I've had a chance, I know a lot of coaches in your league, and one of the things that stood out to so many coaches in your league is how adaptable you are defensively in terms of, you're trying to disrupt, somewhat junk it a little bit to be able to create any advantage possible. And I just love that philosophy of trying to figure things out and not being married to necessarily one type of thing. So talk to us a little bit about your adaptability, especially defensively.
Well, my eye, everybody's eye is different. What my eye is trained to watch the offensive side of the ball. It just is. I don't, when I'm watching us, I kind of get myself trained to the offensive side of the ball. When I was at Ole Miss, I don't want to say would feel guilty, but I was concerned that if that was correct, I don't want the guy, if I'm always talking offense or when we're playing 5-on-5, I'm controlling the offense. I don't want that to send the message that defense isn't important to our guys. Just because the head coach is talking about offense. No, defensively, that's the one thing that has to be the constant because it's the only thing that truly travels day in, day out. So I didn't want to send the wrong message. But then I was with Billy Donovan, and he's a friend, and he was at Florida when I was at Ole Miss for a number of years. And we were having a conversation, and he does the same thing. At the time, Larry Shyatt was on his staff, and so Larry was kind of his defense coordinator back before those things were in vogue. Now they're common, but back then they weren't necessarily in vogue. And so Billy always said, and it kind of reaffirmed in my mind why my eye shifts towards the offense. He said, the most devastating thing to a team, if you're in game and you can't get a quality shot, then you can preach and yell and scream and do whatever you want to do, but you're not going to have the spirit if you're struggling to get quality shots. Now, sometimes they're going to go and sometimes they're not, but he felt like it was his job to make sure that his team had a quality offensive possession so that their energy level could be maintained. And so that's kind of my approach as well. And so I say that to say we spent a lot of time offensively trying to find angles and ways in which our guys can be successful. But then defensively, one of the things that disrupts me as the offensive coordinator is when a team is constantly its look, most especially with the shot clock the way that it is now. It is disruptive, which is ultimately, you used that term at the beginning of this question, which is ultimately our goal. We want to be disruptive, and we do that just based on, again, we change these things based on our personnel as well, but we want to be disruptive and changing looks so that the other team cannot catch a rhythm. Basketball, as you know, Chris, is the ultimate game of rhythm. Establish yours, disrupt theirs, and it's one of the ways that we attempt to disrupt theirs.
I'm curious if some of those, and by the way, awesome answer. I'll hear that. And then I'm curious about some of these adaptations on defense. Do they come from just literally you're playing basketball within practice, and then you decide to try some things to see if it works for your team, and then to see how it might impact the game as you go forward?
Yeah, and you would be shocked, Chris. So we're like everybody, man. We're heavy into the scouting. We'll put in 20 hours to give it to our team in 40 minutes over 3 days. We can't bog them down, but we spend a lot of time on it. And so, we'll come up with this plan that we think, hey, this team could be susceptible to this pressure or this zone. And then we'll throw it out there and they can shred it and we'll get right out of it. Or we'll say, hey, man, we just need to slow this down. Maybe we got foul trouble. Maybe our team has got a lineup that is not really what we need it to be based on our opponent. And so we'll jump into the 1-1 or we'll jump into some full court pressure, and it works so effectively, we'll close the game in it. So you really have to be adaptable. We're going to always throw everything at you. I don't think there's ever been a game that we didn't throw a little bit of everything. And this year's team will be different than last year's team, but we had, 2 or 3 different looks that you had to be prepared for. And we were going to do them all. And then we were going to see which one worked. And we have to be able to adapt just based on how the other team is responding.
I love that. And that with many of the team. And one of the advantages that people don't think about enough is it actually makes your offense better too, because your offense becomes a lot adaptable because they play against this type of style defensively.
That's right. There's not a lot of things that concern them as much. You're able to adapt because you're used to it day in and day out, as you said.
Yeah. And it's not for everyone, as we know, and you've said that. And, part of that is because a lot of coaches like to know kind of the hard and fast, especially defensively, that this is what happened and this is whose responsibility it is. Does that become a little bit of the muddied challenge of this to figure out whose responsibility it was?
Yeah, no question. You're right. That's the reason most coaches don't do it. Number one, they're not comfortable with it. And if you're not comfortable with it, then you're not going to do it in the game. So why are you going to waste your time? People have asked me, how much time do you have to devote to it? What you have to devote serious time if you're going to really do this, because not only do you have to have confidence in it, as your players have to have confidence in it. They have to know that it is effective, and we chart it throughout the course of the game. And so we're constantly, because if you got into a huddle and there's 2 minutes to play, and you ask the players in the huddle, hey, what do you want to do defensively? They're all going to say man to man. And you want to say, hey, well, statistically, they're gashing us in this man. They've shot about 58%, but against this zone, hey, they're 2 of their last 7. So we have to make sure that they understand the effectiveness that we're doing, because kids immediately just want to say, oh, okay, I'm going to guard my guy. Well, if you were guarding your guy a little better, we wouldn't be doing this. So trust me here, I want to win too. So we're trying to slow this group down that we're having a hard time as it relates to man. So you got to build, you've got to trust in it as a coach, and then you've also got to build trust in it through your players and confidence in it, so that when the game is on the line, they can come up and make the play.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to coach this way too, and to try and figure things out, as you said. And then you talked about the best version of themselves and that philosophy. That also connects to your offense a little bit, where your best players, you're going to put them into situations to be successful. So talk to us a little bit about that. Some of the unique players. How are some ways that you're trying to maximize them?
Yeah, and if we had a few of my players on here, they would echo this. I think counters are so overrated. I want guys to play to their strength. If the baseball is playing as we speak, and a good pitcher's got 3 pitches, but he's going to go to his best pitch about 85% of the time. The other 2 is just to kind of let you know it's there and to keep you off balance so you can't sit on the fastball, so to speak. I think the same in basketball. I think that stay to your strength. You just need a move and a counter. You need a move counter. If you could have 2 moves and 2 counters, you're an elite offensive player to me. And then let's just play to that. And that's my job, to try to, again, create an angle, create some space so that you can play to your strength. There has to be a counter to that, but ultimately I want guys playing to their strengths. In college basketball, the evolution of Steph Curry and, the old James Harden, no disrespect, but the old James Harden, who would dribble it 18 times and then go make a play, the old Rockets James Harden. I think, a lot of kids with that and the Steph Curry evolution started doing a lot of that dribbling in space, unnecessary counters, not getting in the spot. And I try to explain to our guys, well, the NBA, they don't have illegal defense. There's a thing called illegal defense. You can't sit and help. In our game, no, man, you got about 2-3 bounces in a half court to get to your spot, because everybody's going to sprint to help. So we try to eliminate unnecessary counters, and we try to play to your strength. Jelly Walker, for instance, he's a small guy, but he's really quick. And he's really good at getting it off quickly. He could get it off the catch, or he could get it off the dribble. He was really, really special at getting it off the dribble from deep and still being able to make it at a livable percentage at around 40%. I had a kid named Marshall Henderson back at Ole Miss in 2013. We win the SEC tournament, and we beat Wisconsin in the NCAA tournament to advance, and had an incredible, we won 27 games, most in the history of the program. And Marshall Henderson was really, really good at baseline, running off these baseline runners, catching and shooting as his body was going against away from the basket. Really, really good at that. I had a left-handed kid named Murphy Holloway, the all-time leading rebounder in the history of Ole Miss, who's now back working for Chris Beard on staff. I'm really proud of him. And he could go left and lefter. That was it. He had range to about 3 feet, and he was going to get to his left hand. And he did it continuously, because we try to put a position to get downhill to his left hand. Those are just a few of the examples of, to your point, we try to find what guys are good at and then play through their strength.
Coach, move and a counter move. Like, you just destroyed everyone on Instagram that's sharing the 10 different moves and the 10 different ways to pick up the ball and all this stuff. But it is that simple. And I know we get kind of confused by all these different things, but talk to us about how you help your players understand that, because then you need these, but you're right. You just need a move and a counter.
Yeah, you just got to be really good. You got to find out what you're good at, and then we got to try to play through that. And it's one thing to talk about it, and we do talk about it. We talk about it daily, but it's really just, we try to instill it in drills. We're just trying to create habits. I said it earlier. At the end of the day, we're all a collection of habits. You are, Chris, I am. We're just a collection of our habits, and we want to have more good habits than bad habits. We're going to have some bad habits. We just want to have more good habits, and that's what we try to do in basketball as well. All of our drills are systematically set up to try to play to the strength, eliminate counters, hopefully creating what we refer to as muscle memory, i.e. a basketball habit that they will go to when the lights come on.
Love it. And, one of the things about having this approach, the style of offense kind of built around your best players and their skill sets, is to empower other players and to make them feel like they belong. So talk to us about that, because again, you seem to do very well with players off the ball being engaged and being involved.
Yeah, again, ultimately, we always talk about Larry Brown, coined the phrase, play the right way. Just play the right way. We want to put our guys in a position. We want to strike quickly. I'm not a big believer in the ball should go from A to B to C to get to D. If I wanted to get to D, let's get it to D. We try to create some all. We're sitting here at the end of October and we're running dry run air. Well, we could whip that thing around, and Chris, you would sit there and be really impressed. Boy, they share that ball. Look at their spacing. But in a game, I want to get it where I want. So we eliminate the opportunity for future mistakes so that we can get a shot on the rim. I've always said that I believe that a bad shot is better than a turnover. We've always traditionally been good off our offensive glass. Get it on the glass, fight for extra possessions. I think last year, actually, we were one of the best teams in all of college basketball in getting second chance opportunities. And we've also been, even though we're a volume team, we typically don't turn it over that much. And that's because we shoot it quick. We want to get it down. We want to get it turned. I'm a big believer in the ball changing sides of the floor, and then we want to attack.
So not a ton of multiple actions, be able to get it to your player, right? Like just be direct and get it to the point and try and leverage an advantage.
Yeah, no question. And I tell our guys all the time, back in the old days, again, when I played, there was a thing called the old 5-second count. So you couldn't sit there and just dribble forever. I mean, there was a hard count on you, so you would have to make extra passes, possibly played in the era of the 4-5-second clock. So there's a lot of passing going on. A lot. In our era, you don't have to do that. So, it's kind of ball screen heavy. We had a real ball screen heavy team last year. This year, maybe not as much just based off personnel, but we want to try to create angles to give our guys an opportunity to go and ultimately be best version of themselves.
Talking about that defense and that philosophy of kind of playing multiple different types of defenses, are you changing within possession sometimes, or mainly just from possession to possession? And then I guess the second part of that, is it a little bit easier to teach nowadays because you're getting players that have played in multiple systems, like you refer to as a player?
Yeah, I think each differently. And I'll tell you this, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but I think different teams have a temperament for being good or bad in a zone. I really believe that. I've had a team I've had multiple teams that if you look at them physically, you'd say, boy, they'd be a good zone. They've got length, they react to the ball, they fly around, but they just didn't have a feel for it. Then I've had teams that you would look and say, that team really is not built like they would be good in this 1-3-1 because you need some size on the wings. You got to keep the ball out of certain areas, but they had an adaptability to it. Last year's group, I had a pretty good defensive team. We weren't good in one-on-one situations. We had small guards. Jelly's 5'10", 165 pounds. Eric Gaines is 160 pounds. And we got big boys sometimes off the bounce because of physicality. We just lacked it to starting guards. So we zoned a lot. We pressed a lot. And we had a pretty smart and adapt zone team. To question, there are times that, let's say, for instance, we play this 1-3-1, and when the ball goes to the corner, the reason people don't play a lot of 1-3-1 is because it's very difficult to rebound out of it. So we have different shifts. The ball can go to the corner. We can trap out of it. And then when they get it out of the corner, we will match up man to man. Or sometimes the ball will go to the corner and we'll transition into a 2-3 zone. The guy, the 1-3-1, just exchanges with the opposite wing to put him back on the back line. So now we've got our three biggest players on our back line, and we're in a 2-3 zone. And typically teams are attacking that at the 15, 16, 17 second mark. Zone offense in 17 seconds, they're not going to get to options 3 and 4. So again, it limits their ability to attack you effectively. And then there's also last year's team almost do it a little bit too much. I do give my quarterback the option to audible. I would prefer he didn't audible as much, but when you give them the option to audible, they're going to audible. And so we would go 1-3-1 to 2-3, and the ball entered the high post. If he turned to face, the 5 would engage him and we would be man-to-man. So many times we would be in 3 different defenses over a 30-second period, which sometimes worked and sometimes different. I do think it was confusing, sometimes to our opponent, many times to us. So I'm not sure how advantageous it was.
That's so true. And those audibles, that's fascinating. So how do you develop that for your players and understanding, or particularly your leaders that get to audible? And then how do they feel more comfortable to do that at the right time?
Well, it's like anything, Chris. They have to earn. They have to earn that by making the right decision time after time after time in practice, and then we will give them the latitude to extend that into the games. And successful with it, we'll continue to build off of it. If we don't feel like that we're doing it the right way, then we'll just put a hard and fast rule, and we're not going to do that. But we're still in evolution. Last year's team was really good at it. It had a kid named KJ Buffin, a transfer from Ole Miss, who was a very cerebral player. He's playing in Finland now, of all places. God bless. I follow him on I don't follow anybody, but I go on his Instagram story just to make sure he's alive. And he was like, it was like October 14th, and it was already snowing over there in Atlanta, Georgia. So he's going to have to adapt really quickly. But he had a really good sense of understanding when to call the audible. So he was kind of like my Mike Singletary. I let him call the defense at times.
That's brilliant. And I've watched Finnish basketball. Of course I have.
Good basketball.
Yeah, like I'm telling you that some of those teams run some really impressive stuff. And it's not exactly our style that we're talking about here. Like they run multiple actions before the main action, but some of those actions, man, they just lose players. So what a basketball life it is to be able to go play overseas, Ed.
Yeah, no question. I had an opportunity. I had two of my guys last year. Juan Jackson, who was in the first transfer group with me, and Mike Ertl, also in the first transfer group. Both of them started in Finland last year, and both of them, Mike is now in France and evolving, and proud of those guys. They all want to continue to play, and they had great experiences there. For one, I came out and was released by the old Charlotte Hornets back in the day. It was like this time of the year, as you're getting used to getting ready for roster. And I played in Greece, I played in Holland, I played in Portugal, I played in Spain. I've kind of bounced around myself. So a long time ago, but I can certainly understand the transition that these guys are going through.
Talk to us about that. How did that type of experience of kind of going to multiple countries, multiple places, multiple coaches, how did that influence your coaching?
I wasn't thinking about that at the time,
No.
Chris. I was a typical, 22, 23-year-old ass. I was out there. I was just wanting to hoop, be a professional basketball player. I couldn't even, now, you're going to spend me to go to Greece, see the Parthenon in a hotel, literally, and would have to pass the Parthenon to go to practice. And I'm not sure I even acknowledged it once. So
that's awesome. Yeah.
I had some over there. I really did. I played against some really good players and some really good leagues, and then some not good leagues. I was in Holland, and it was ice cold in many of the gyms. This was back in the day. I don't know if it's still like that. I hadn't been to Holland in a while, but smoking indoors was still very much a thing in Holland. So there would be so much cigarette smoke in the gym, you could literally barely see half court. It was just drinking beer at halftime, taping their own ankles. It was quite an experience.
Different world, and a lot of fun, but definitely colder than where you're living now for sure. So,
yeah, for sure.
Coach, obviously a big part of your success and any coach's success in this modern era is obviously evaluating talent. Particularly, obviously, we talked about the transfer portal. So, talk to us a little bit about that process. What do you actually look for when you're evaluating a player to be a part of your program?
Well, it's gotten very difficult, even though technology, i.e. synergy, has made it easy to see. You can see the volume, but we don't have the time that we used to have. The old days of when I was an assistant, even when I was starting in my head coaching journey in the mid 2000s, 05 with Cincinnati, 06 for a 12-year run at Ole Miss. You would be out and you could see guys in live action multiple times. You had multiple opportunities to interact and get a feel for kind of who they were and whether or not it was going to fit for you from a cultural standpoint, from a mindset standpoint in your program. Now it's like speed dating. It's like I really, again, I'm a transfer myself. I'm all for opportunities, and I'm all for the premise of NIL. And this thing has evolved into pay for. I don't think it's good for anybody. I don't think it's good for the kid. I don't think it's good for the sport. I don't think it's good for any of these other than the immediate gratification of trying to get some cash. But the process has just gone so much more quickly that literally we've been pretty fortunate. Now, we have certainly missed on a lot of guys, but we've hit on a few key ones. And that's the key, right? You just got to hit on a few. And we've been able to hit off of relationships more than evaluations. Guys that we have dealt with, I've been in this business 30 years. I've got a veteran staff. And guys, kind of trust, like for instance, okay, you hear Andy Kennedy, you think he's going to play this game. And most especially if you've got a guard that can go, then, hey, we let you go. and if you can come here and get it done, we're going to put you in a position where you can showcase that. So you'd be amazed at the amount of people that reach out and say, hey, I got a guy for you. And that's how a lot of these things have evolved for us, simply because the time and the rules have just changed so much. You really can't dig in and trust. You're just not going to see guys long enough to be able to say, yeah, this is what we're looking for. So it comes back to relationships and doing right by people and by kids, so that people can trust you and reach out to say, hey, I may have somebody that you're interested in.
Coach Kennedy, you've been doing this a long time. I'm curious, what is something or some things that have changed in your coaching over the years?
I'm entering my 17th year as a head coach, 27th overall. In 2018, when my tenure ended at Ole Miss, that was really it was eye-opening for me in a good way. I did the television thing for 2 years, and you got to remember, and you can relate to this, Chris. Like, NBA starts Tuesday, and I'll be watching whoever's on. I think the Lakers are playing, Denver, and I'll be watching that with a notepad and a pen, enjoying the game, but also trying to see, hey, man, maybe we could do something similar to this based on our personnel. So, point being, when you're a coach, everything that you're watching, from football to baseball to basketball, NBA, you are watching it under the eye of a coach. You're dissecting it and trying to think, is there anything that I can take from this to help my current situation? So then I did the TV thing. So now I don't have it. So now I can look at it somewhat at a 30,000 foot view, so to speak. And I had incredible access. Another thing, Chris, that people don't realize is, okay, when you're part of a program, most especially as a head coach, other people aren't inviting you to practice. So the only practices that you see are the ones that you're involved in. Now, I had a good relationship with a number of the people with the Grizzlies, so I would go up there when they're in camp. But come on, man, that's completely different than what I was doing. So when I was doing the TV, and especially in the SEC area, I had such a relationship with all the guys in the league that I would come in and they would say, hey, man, come into our film sessions. I want you to do, what do you think about this? I was almost like their psychologist a little bit, somebody to vent to that they could trust. But also it opened up, a lot of different ways to do a lot of different things, some of which I took me, some of which just basically affirmed some of the things I'd been doing in the past. So it was really, really good for me. So when I then, get the opportunity to come back to my alma mater, it was the COVID year, which was really bizarre for all of us, as you remember. But it enabled me to kind of change the way in which I kind of go about it. I'm still very intense. I'm still want to hold guys to a standard, accountability. Kelvin Sampson, I think I just said at media today, there's 3 people that can't ever have a bad day in practice: the head coach, your point guard, and your best player. And I agree with that completely. The head coach can't have a bad day. They're gonna feed off your energy, and if you allow them to slack or to cut corners, guess what they're going to do? They're going to slack and they're going to cut corners. So you got to be on it from that standpoint. But I do think I'm fair, and I do think, that you guys can trust that I'm telling them.
So much that those television years in a way were a blessing to just be able to be a part of the game, and obviously your love of game shines through, but also your love of coaching, and to be able to dive deep. Was there anything in particular or some things in particular that stood out? You don't have to name specific programs, but some kind of learnings that stood out from being able to kind of observe those practices and those experiences.
Yeah, the most amazing thing, Chris, and you know this, but when you get to see it on a day in and day out, it's really the polar opposite approaches different people take. I won't name names, but these are all successful, Hall of Fame level, or going to be Hall of Fame guys. And one guy does it one way, and another guy is 180 degrees different. One guy is physical, 5-on-5, going at it, accountable, energy high. One guy is walkthroughs and clapping, and yet you find a way. It's just based on the dynamics of your team. So the polar opposite approaches was very, very eye opening, and it just kind of shows that at the end of the day, my advice for all young coaches is, hey man, trust your gut. I'm an instincts guy, man. Trust your gut. Be true to yourself, because if you're not true to yourself, if you're not believing in what you're doing, you're going to vary off of it. When things get hard, you're going to pivot. And if you pivot too much when times are tough, kids are going to see right through it. You're going to lose credibility. If you lose credibility, you're done.
Absolutely great advice. And talk to us a little bit about this, a little bit your Be Relentless philosophy, but this this idea of developing an edge in your players, because again, that way, and you referenced it, is different than it might have been 10 years ago in terms of how we would approach that. So talk to us a little bit about how the modern Andy Kennedy coaches that and tries to develop that edge in players.
Well, again, I think it ultimately comes back to accountability, letting them understand that, okay, no, you're going to do it right. And if you don't do it right, you're going to do it again. And this is the standard. This isn't good enough. And accountability. So it becomes ingrained in them. Again, goes to my idea of habits. We're all creatures of habit. And I don't care how prepared you are, your players are going to divert back to their habits. And so we just are trying to create this right habit regimen within our team so that then they can build confidence in doing it this way. You want your teams to be humble in practice, but arrogant in games. I read this that I think I forget the name of the book, but and it was 100% right. You want your guys to be humble in practice, to be able to take coaching, to be able to understand, to stay in the moment. Okay, he's telling me this because I need to correct a bad habit. I've got to change this. But then going into the games, you don't want them to be confident. You want them to be arrogant because there's going to be so many extenuating circumstances that are going to try to tear you down. So that arrogance needs to be on game day. And there's a difference. There's a balance. Humble inspiration, arrogance and performance.
Love that. That's such a simple putting it. And that's what we want to do for you is obviously in practice, you're going to struggle a little bit more because we're creating these conditions for you to struggle. And then in the game, we want you to be ultra confident. And that blend is difficult, isn't it, to be able to do? So maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the ways that you get your players to be confident for the games.
Well, again, it goes back to repetition and doing the things that we do day in and day out. So you've earned the right to be successful. Kids are something now. I mean, they can put off this bris or bravado, but you can tell who's really inwardly confident. But what's confidence? Confidence is performance. That's all it is. Confidence is somebody that has done it time and time again, and they are confident because they have been able to perform at a consistent level. So what you do as a coach, you try to put them in a position where they can develop this confidence. And it's true, it's inward because they know they put the work in, they've earned the right to be successful. They've stacked the work, they've gotten the reps, and they have this performance background of success that they can reflect upon.
Well, I mean, and you've stacked the work over all these years and different places. Talk to us a little bit about that concept of being able to be adaptable and coach at different places. I mean, now at your alma mater, you're a little more familiar, but it's something when you were there, I'm sure. But talk to us a little bit about your adaptability as a coach from place to place.
Well, ultimately, you got to be true to yourself, as we talked about. You got to figure out, okay, I for a long time, I was with Bob Huggins for 5 years, and for a long time, it was when I got into coaching, it was different. Kids were different, and when I was a player, if a coach told me I couldn't do something, my immediate response was, "I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you I can do it." Now the difference sometimes, quite frankly, if you're on a kid too much and you say, "Hey man, you can't do this, you can't do that," many times I can see in their face they're like, "Hey, mate, he might be right," and so they pivot away from where you want them to go. So for us, every job is different. No two jobs are created equal. In Oxford, Mississippi, in the SEC was so much different at that time than the situation that I'm in now. You've got to figure out the lay of the land in your current situation and recruit to it. I think every job has a different dynamic as it relates to who you're attracted to. And ultimately, let's don't get this twisted. This is about players, and you've got to get good players. And then you've got to put them in the best position possible to be successful. And they've got to believe. They've got to believe in you and in what you're doing for them. And if you do that, you've got ultimately a chance for our goal, which is, let's say it together, Chris, best version of self. That's the goal. And ultimately, you've got an opportunity to do that if you can check all those boxes.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love the consistent simplicity of your messaging, obviously, in terms of your mantras and then how that connects to obviously becoming the best version of yourself. Talk to us a little bit about dealing with some of those players that you have to, let's say, hold more accountable in terms of that. What are some ways that you can hold players more accountable nowadays?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned is giving them more responsibility. We give our guys a lot of small choices, and we're 2 weeks away from the season, so we're kind of building this thing. But we start giving them small choices. Okay, what do you want to eat? When you want to eat? What color uniform? That and the third. What about this or that? So that they take on ownership. Ultimately, as a coach, you just want to figure out a way in which your players will take more ownership. When you have 9 new players, like our current situation, and everybody's just trying to figure out what's going on, right now I still got guys that are trying to figure out, how do I not get a parking ticket every day on campus? Where do I wash my clothes? Just the base necessities. So we're trying to get that the team is theirs, and it's going to be good or bad depending upon their level of ownership. And as I've tried to get now, I've got 4 returning players, 2 guys that had started or actually only really 1 guy that started the majority of the games, in Eric Gaines, and another kid in Javion Davis that started a few games, played a backup role in that 4 or 5 slot. I need their roles to expand. And then I had 2 kids that were role players off the bench in the backcourt. You can't have the same mentality of just kind of going along and being a wallflower. Now your voice needs to become louder, and kids sometimes are resistant to that. Because in order to hold other people accountable, you've got to be willing to be held accountable yourself. That is the battle that goes on, especially as you have guys that are evolving in roles, and that's something that we're currently undergoing.
That's a really impressive approach, Coach. And I want to highlight that for everyone. Like in terms of some of those players, maybe challenging initially, instead of consequences, instead of like being demeaning, even being demanding. First thing is to try and give them responsibilities where they feel more part of it. They feel more belonging within your program, and that's such a great approach to it. And why not start?
Well, ultimately, you're gonna get pushback, and again, when you're dealing with 18, 19, 20, now 22, 23, 24, sometimes with these COVID seniors and such, the age of your roster has certainly grown since the days that I played, but you're still dealing with guys that, when things go bad, it's easy and it's human nature to say, "Oh, it's not me. It can't be my fault," right? But if you say, "Hey, man, this is the way you guys want to do it. You said you wanted to," I have found that they do take on more personal ownership because they feel more part of the solution.
I love it, Coach. I mean, so many great insights throughout this podcast, and maybe just give us some insights in terms of those young coaches approaching the profession nowadays. The profession is certainly different than when you started, so maybe offer some advice to those young coaches that are starting off in the profession.
Yeah, I would just say again, there's no A to B to get to C. I think I told you it would be so different than what you would have imagined. And I get it, man. Every assistant coach wants to coach. So did I. I get it, and I want to try to help those guys evolve. But what I found is again pretty simple and pretty basic, man. Be where your feet are. Job that you can be totally vested, worried about, self-motion. Do your job, because if you win games, people are going to look at your situation from a player standpoint, from an assistant coach standpoint, and say, "Hey, what are they doing?" Because they're doing something right. And whether it be a player or an assistant coach, hey, I want some of that in my program. And I found really the best way in order to ascend in this business.
Wonderful advice. And Coach, I mean, I saw you on TV. I mean, I've listened to you before on different podcasts or different types of interviews. You absolutely do a great job giving back to the game in so many ways, and I cannot thank you enough for sharing the game with us.
Well, Chris, I appreciate you. Much respect. I appreciate everything you're doing for college basketball.